Glenn, this is a historic day. Donald Trump found guilty on all 34 felony counts. So we have a ton of questions. A lot of them were submitted by viewers. A lot of them I have. So let's get right into it here. The first is Donald Trump still bound by the gag order? And what happens if he violates it now that the trial's over?
So now that Donald Trump was convicted by a jury of his peers in a New York minute, in less than 2 days of deliberations after a several weeks long trial, as far as I know, the gag order remains in place. There is nothing that Judge Merchan said on the record indicating that the gag order, has been lifted or would evaporate at the moment the jury entered its verdicts. So if I were the prosecutor, I would say, Judge, it still remains in effect unless and until you lift it, because even though the trial on the merits is over, the case is not over, right? The case is now pending sentencing set for July 11th. So I think the better argument at this point is if Donald Trump starts threatening witnesses and jurors and judges' family members, he will be looking at more than the 10 criminal convictions for contempt of Congress he already has on his criminal resume.
Okay, and that actually leads to my next question, which is, what if Donald Trump incites violence against one of these jurors given the verdict that was handed down?
It would be in violation of the gag order, and I think the New York prosecutors would aggressively investigate it, and if the evidence supported it, seek to indict Donald Trump for obstructing justice by retaliating against witnesses or jurors. Those are often separate charges than what you think of as that kind of pretrial obstruction of justice when you're interfering with witnesses, trying to keep them from providing incriminating information or evidence against you. Some jurisdictions will have separate statutes to address intimidation or retaliation against jurors or witnesses who have, involved themselves in the endeavor of holding you accountable by testifying or by sitting in judgment as a juror.
Now, when you say this would be separate charges, I mean, when Donald Trump violated his gag order more than 10 times at the beginning of this trial, that was a contempt charge, but it was contained within this trial. Would he have to face these charges outside of this trial, or would they be part of this case here, and would he face punishment as part of the sentencing that's upcoming on July 11th?
Yeah, what a great question. The answer is both. So what we saw was, it's called summary contempt. When a judge has his or her order violated during the course of the trial, the judge can have basically a mini trial, which really just looks like an argument by both sides as to whether the defendant did or did not violate the gag order. Judge Merchan held that hearing, a couple of hearings, and concluded that Donald Trump did in fact violate the gag order. He found that beyond a reasonable doubt, because think of it as a mini conviction, right? It's not the kind of full-blown trial we ordinarily think of, but it still is a conviction for criminal contempt of court. So if Donald Trump violates the gag order moving forward, you could see some more of these mini trials, a summary contempt conviction, or you could also see DA Bragg open a brand new grand jury investigation to look into any threats or retaliation against jurors, witnesses, or others, but that wouldn't be handled as part of the case that is now moving toward the sentencing hearing on July 11th. That would be a separately indicted charge, a brand new case, and that would make, for those of us scoring at home, Donald Trump's fifth criminal prosecution.
And given the way these prosecutions have gone thus far, I think it would be in his best interest to maybe take a chill pill when it comes to committing crimes, because he doesn't have a very good track record thus far between E. Jean Carroll, his fraud case, and now this New York falsifying business records case. Glenn, let's talk about Donald Trump's appeal. When can he appeal, and will his appeal have any bearing on the sentencing?
No. You only get to appeal your conviction in a criminal case once you've been sentenced. Why? Because that's when the case has concluded. Then the attorney will file what's called a notice of appeal, indicating to the courts Donald Trump plans to file an appeal, and then there will be a briefing schedule set, and the appellate courts will give the defense whatever time the defense claims they need to file an appeal. But the big ticket, so the appeals process will commence when Donald Trump is sentenced, and then it will take a very long time. Most criminal appeals do. But of course, the big ticket issue, and we're probably going to get to this, I don't want to jump ahead of the narrative, but what is the sentence likely to be, and will that sentence be stayed or imposed pending appeal? But let me let you ask the questions that you want to ask first.
No, that's exactly it. Take those away.
Okay. First of all, I believe Donald Trump will be sentenced to a period of incarceration, and here's why I say that. He's committed 34 felony crimes in violation of the New York state laws. Now, it is a relatively low-level felony. It's a Class E felony, which I believe is the lowest kind of rung on the felony ladder under the criminal statutes of New York State. However, I think Judge Merchan will appreciate that if Donald Trump is not punished, and by punishment, I mean incarceration, because let's face it, probation is not punishment. Probation, you don't spend a single minute in a jail cell. Now, there's something called a split sentence, where a judge could say, I'm going to sentence you to, let's just hypothetically say, 1 year in prison. I'm going to suspend all but 30 days. That's called the split sentence. What that means is Donald Trump would have to serve 30 days, then he would be out on probation with the remaining 11 months of his 1 year sentence hanging over his head. And if he, acted up, engaged in misconduct while on probation, he could be put in to do the balance of his sentence.
And does that include violating the gag order? Would that include, would probation include that?
It would if the gag order remained in effect, but I'm not sure. Once he's sentenced, I don't think the gag order will remain in effect. Why? Because at that point, a trial court loses jurisdiction, loses all authority over the case once an appeal has been filed, and then it is exclusively a matter for the appellate court. But here's why I think Judge Merchan will put Donald Trump in a jail cell. First of all, both the prosecution and the defense will file a memo in aid of sentencing, laying out their arguments as to what the appropriate sentence is in the view of the prosecutors, in the view of the defense. I can just about guarantee our viewers, Brian, that the prosecutors will ask for jail time in their request to Judge Merchan. Doesn't mean he has to accept that request. But I do think Judge Merchan will appreciate that if there's no punishment in this case, if there's probation, or in some ways what is just as bad as probation, home detention, which you and I have talked about before, that's like sentencing somebody to binge watch Netflix and order DoorDash. That's a vacation for Donald Trump more than it is punishment. Right. So I think Judge Merchan will understand if he doesn't put Donald Trump in a jail cell, there will be absolutely no point to this painful, up and down, anxiety-producing endeavor we have all just lived through as Americans. Because absent punishment, which looks like incarceration, there's no deterrent value. No other future aspiring day one dictator, nobody else who might choose to falsify business records to cheat in an election, whether a presidential election or other election, no one will be deterred if Donald Trump is not punished. In fact, Brian, they will be encouraged. They will be emboldened. If they realize that Donald Trump can get away with it, even in the event of 34 felony convictions, he can get away unpunished, I think Judge Merchan will sentence him to incarceration. I also think that is more likely, given that during the course of this trial, he violated the gag order 10 times. He was convicted. He was found beyond a reasonable doubt by Judge Merchan to have violated the gag order 10 times. Each violation came with up to 30 days in jail. And Judge Merchan said, I don't want to incarcerate you because you're a former president and you may be a future president. I think that was a low point for Judge Merchan, who otherwise presided beautifully over this case. I think those words are perhaps still kind of bouncing around Judge Merchan's thoughts. And I think the time has now come for Donald Trump to see the inside of a jail cell, to actually be punished for the crimes he committed against the people of New York, and by extension, against the people of the United States.
Glenn, we're about to see Donald Trump embark on, a tirade against the legal system, against the judge, against prosecutors like we haven't seen before. Do you think that if Donald Trump levels especially heinous attacks at the judge, at these prosecutors, at the court, at the jurors, that will have some impact in the sentencing?
It should. So anything that a defendant does in that period when he is pending sentencing, between the time a jury finds him guilty and the judge sentences him, is absolutely fair game in what's called aggravation. So the prosecutors present their case in aggravation. In other words, why is the defendant who has just been convicted worthy of a period of incarceration, and what has he done, not only prior to the trial and during the trial, but in that in-between period after he was convicted but before he was sentenced. All of that is fair game. I once had a defendant, believe it or not, when he was pending sentencing, give an interview to HBO. HBO was doing a documentary of this guy. It was called Thug Life in D.C. Yeah. And he actually said, you know what? I'll kill again. What did I do? I packaged up that clip and played it for the judge at the time of sentencing to say, Judge, just in case you thought the defendant might have any rehabilitative potential or has learned his lesson, let me play a little something for you. So absolutely, anything Donald Trump does, I would expect the prosecutors to package up in that sentencing memo in aid, or the memo in aid of sentencing, and present it to the judge, and he will absolutely take it into account.
Well, as we all know, Donald Trump is very good at controlling himself, and his attorneys are good at controlling their clients, so I don't foresee any problems in that arena. Glenn, we've spoken about this before, and I hate to bring the mood down, but isn't it a fair assessment that if Judge Merchan had come out once, you were talking about the low point before, and he had said, I'm loath to incarcerate you because you were a former president and you may very well be the next president, doesn't that suggest doesn't that kind of betray a little bit of Judge Merchan's thinking? That
it does.
What do you think about that? Is that a fair read of this, and that we might be able to kind of glean his thought process and all of this, because he kind of gave us a preview of how he perceives Donald Trump?
Yeah, Brian, thank you for forcing me to take off my prosecutor's glasses. I usually wear my government blinders with pride, right? But you're absolutely right. That is the flip side of the coin, right? The argument that I made, maybe Judge Merchan, who you could almost feel was wanting to incarcerate Donald Trump for his 10 counts of criminal contempt, maybe he was just sort of exposing his own sentiment that there's nothing that will ever move me to put Donald Trump inside of a jail cell. But that's not my read. My read really is, Judge Merchan is a very experienced, very serious, very accomplished jurist. And I think the way he presided over this case kind of proves that point. This was not an easy case to preside over. I think he is potentially even a little regretful for not treating Donald Trump the way he would have treated any other defendant under similar circumstances. And that's why I am not reading his comments, disappointing though they were, as an indication that he will never put Donald Trump in jail. Think about this. He would have been putting Donald Trump in jail for Donald Trump committing a crime really only involving one person. That one person is Judge Merchan. Judge Merchan set some rules to control his proceedings, and Donald Trump violated those rules. In a sense, Judge Merchan is the victim of that crime. I know that's why summary contempt gets a little bit messy sometimes. That's also why when Judge Merchan's daughter was threatened, Judge Merchan kind of shied away from proceeding on a contempt charge for the threat against his daughter because there's a potential conflict there. But I really do think now that 12 jurors of Donald Trump's peers have found him guilty of 34 felony crimes, that is a whole different calculation for Judge Merchan when he's deciding what the appropriate sentence is for that. And I think for that reason and others we've discussed, you're going to see Judge Merchan impose some period of incarceration for Donald Trump.
And I hope that's exactly what happens. Let's talk about this pre-sentencing period that we're in right now. You mentioned before that that Judge Merchan will come back on July 11th with his sentencing. What happens in this 5-week period that we're in right now, and why do we have to wait this amount of time?
Yeah, it's business as usual to have about a 6-week period of time between the time the jury returns its verdict and the sentencing date. Why? Well, because generally judges don't know anything about a defendant. Now, we all know everything about Donald Trump, or quite a bit about Donald Trump, as does Judge Merchan. Ordinarily, that's not the case. So during that 6-week period, there is what's called a pre-sentence report that is drafted, reviewed, issued, and then provided to the judge. It is a very long, work-intensive process, usually, and Donald Trump, I'm sure, has already been ordered or will be ordered to sit down for an interview with a member of the probation office for the Manhattan court system, because that's what happens to every defendant after they are convicted. And then the pre-sentence report writer will interview the defendant who's been convicted, and then we'll do a full background investigation, literally family history, education, work experience, criminal history, not only prior convictions, but any arrests or other brushes with the law, any mental health issues, any educational deficits, any drug abuse issues with this particular defendant. I mean, it is really, these things can be 50 pages or more, and they are designed to provide a judge as much information about the person he or she is going to sentence as is humanly possible. After it's drafted, a copy is provided to the prosecutors, a copy is provided to the defense. They get to object to anything they see in there that they may believe is inaccurate. As I say, they also provide their own sentencing memos directly to the judge. But this is a pretty information-intensive process that may seem like overkill when it comes to Donald Trump, because everybody knows about Donald Trump and his background. Just Google the man. But that is not the case with respect to the vast majority of defendants who are going from being convicted by a jury to being sentenced by a judge.
Glenn, why wasn't Donald Trump put in cuffs and hauled away after the guilty verdicts were read? I mean, we've seen in other instances, at least I hope it's not just on TV, but isn't it normal that in many instances a newly convicted felon would be hauled away and remanded to custody immediately?
Yes, in violent crime cases, in drug cases, ordinarily the minute the jury says guilty, the judge will say, marshals, step him back if it's in a federal court, or bailiff or court security, step him back. That means take him into custody, and you see people cuffed and taken into the jail cell that sits right behind the judge's bench. That is not generally the case with white-collar crime, and this is really more of a white-collar crime. White-collar criminals, unfortunately, are treated with kid gloves, and I think that is a sad commentary on the unequal application of the law, because if you snatch a purse or you sell a rock of crack, chances are you're going to have cuffs slapped on you the moment a jury votes guilty. White-collar criminals, we treat them with kid gloves. You know, not only, and this is the part that really rankles me, Brian, not only are they not taken into custody pending sentencing, but even after they are sentenced, rather than being taken into custody immediately, which is absolutely overwhelmingly the norm, judges sometimes give them time to go home and get their affairs in order. You know, I've never seen a person who was not privileged, powerful, influential, connected, political, be allowed to go home and get their affairs into order.
Right.
That's ugly. That's some of the ugliness of the criminal justice system that, frankly, we need to fight to rectify. So, no, but in white-collar cases, it's not unusual for somebody to go home pending sentencing, and even go home for a little bit of time to, get their affairs in order after they've been sentenced, before they have to report to start their period of incarceration.
It is Friday, the 31st of May of 2024, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef. Precious the little Yorkie is our door girl, and she will be seating you directly for our especially special daily special Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all Nighthawks in the Diner of Life. Oh my. Yes, it's Friday, and traditionally in American society, this was the cocktail day. And it only became the cocktail day because people moved away from the daily cocktail hour. And the only reason that we had the daily cocktail hour is because there used to be a couple of them. You had a noontime cocktail hour. You had right after work, which could be about 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, cocktail hour, and then another one at 7. Granted, we were just kids when that was occurring. Some of us. So, here at the salon that we call West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, of course, the Speakeasy is always there. We don't really speak too much about it because it is a speakeasy. Regardless, the French 77 is available daily in the Speakeasy, but today we honor the cocktail and, being Nighthawks in the diner of life. Yep, those midnight hours. Well, it's morning here at the mothership, and what a glorious day. We'll get into the weather a little bit later, but it's very beautiful. Jeez. As soon as I mention wildfires, we're going to get them. But I'm keeping my fingers crossed because we've gone quite a bit here without having a major conflagration. Yep. We'll see what the summer portends, because you never know. Anyway, right now is very beautiful, and yes, on the personal front, still working away, dealing with the aftermath of Mom's passing, and one of the things that has actually helped, whenever I've had any sort of, shall we say, psychological dissonance, one of my practices to sort of get out of the funk is to, now some people might call this avoidance in the psychology community, and they may be right, but it's worked for me. Anyway, just to work. Do what is next, in the old Buddhist sense. Excuse me, I still have a little bit of a scratch and a catch and a frog in my throat and my chest. So if I'm clearing too much, it's because I don't want to click. So it's a choice that one has to make. Do you want to hear a little grunt and a cough, or do you want to hear that click and the scratch? Well, I can mute and clear my throat that way. I hope I get to it because I've made that mistake before, not getting to the mute button. Who wants to go through that? No one. And I'm sorry for putting those of you through it who had to experience it. You won't ever again, I promise. Anyway, here at the mothership, I've decided. There's a lot that I put on the back burner because of, actually, in spite of my avoiding the issue, I was intimately caring for Mom in a much more, intimate and full way. She needed a lot more care and looking after towards the end there. I explained it away as that, she just had her carotid surgery and, we got to get her strong. And, I mentioned before, my mom was the Energizer Bunny. She kept bouncing back. But, so there was a lot here at the mothership that I put on the back burner. And, excuse me for one moment here. I'll be right back. Thank you. Anyway, I have a lot to do around here, and I've been doing it. And, yeah, so things got a little dirty and messy. A little overgrown, a little more weeds than we like. And so I've decided that that is the decision, is that to do what is next. Now, in the Buddhist sense, it's supposed to be mindful with no mind. Intention is what I'm trying to get at. And it just seems to work. Some people will say, working is like avoidance. Well, yeah, I guess. I just remember back in the day when I would have any kinds of issues, as long as I was working, I wasn't crying. When I was left to my own devices, I would cry. So, yeah, well, let it out. I never accepted the idea that guys have to keep it in. I'll keep it in until I'm by myself, then I'll let it out. And my letting out is just, getting runny nose, tears, the normal. Whether you admit it or not. Yes, we are Nighthawks in the Diner of Life, are we not? Well, let's see. Since we had another one of those long clips, and I apologize, there's a lot to do still. I'm getting back into the swing of things, so sometimes these longer clips help. And they are very informative, and I think set the tone quite admirably. But what do we have in store for you here in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy as we begin on this Blue Moon Spirits Fridays? Well, after that big lead-in, on the rest of the menu, the mother of a January 6th officer was swatted at her Virginia home only hours, after her son criticized Trump. That's Officer Fanone. A New Mexico judge granted Mark Zuckerberg's request to be dropped from a lawsuit that alleges his company has failed to protect kids from sexual exploitation. It was some underling that did it. Really? Really, Mark? And anti-vaxxers are to blame for the sharp rise of whooping cough in Oregon, because you can mitigate the problem by vaccinations, and anti-vaxxers don't want anybody to be vaxxed for anything, even polio. I kid you not. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where billions of dollars in gold is smuggled out of Africa each year, and most of it ends up in the United Arab Emirates. And Sweden's domestic security agency accused Iran of using established criminal networks in Sweden as a proxy to target Israeli or Jewish interests in the Scandinavian country. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link. The chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln, and she and Ricky are attending Netroots Nation once again this year, so we'll keep you apprised as we move ever closer to that date. And if you would now take a gander across the page from that chat room link that's near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, there is the link to our Patreon page. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, and if you could afford to send us what you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink, for instance, if you could send those funds to us once a month, that really helps us pay the bills, because they are ever increasing, as you know, in life. The prices never go down. They always go up. Anyway, thank you very much for your extended generosity over these many, many years and, helping us pay our bills and therefore allowing us to then fly under the radar and be the powerhouse of resistance that we have been over these many, many years because of your generosity. And all kidding aside, thank you, truly. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on the social medias, do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of those. Thank you, Tom. Follow me on the social medias at Justice Putnam. I post the show notes and links diaries on Daily Co's. Pardon me. 10 minutes before showtime. And that way you have quick access to the actual reports by the actual reporters. There you go. So do that. You can also follow the show as it always has, such as it is, on Twitter. And it's not X, it's Twitter. But you can follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West. And most importantly, would you please pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, Audible, really wherever podcasts can be found. Pick them up. This first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, if I can get it to come up, oh, there it is out of the Washington Post by Peter Herman and Victoria Bissett. Or is it Bisset? Michael Fanone, a former D.C. police officer who was violently assaulted during the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol. Oh, you mean the insurrection. It takes less characters. Criticized former President Donald Trump. I would just say criticized Trump. Maybe I will from now on. Well, he criticized Trump on Tuesday outside the courthouse where Trump is on trial in a hush money case. Hours later, his mother was swatted at her Virginia home. Fanone said that his 75-year-old mother, in her nightgown, opened the door to officers at her home in Fairfax County. She was scared, Fanone told the Washington Post in an interview yesterday morning, Thursday. A fake note purporting to be from Fanone had been emailed to a number of people, claiming the writer of the note had killed his mother and planned to go to the recipient's school to shoot others. It provided the home address of Fanone's mom. NBC News first reported the incident. Fanone said the swatting, which we all know, and the Washington Post has to tell people out there in, low information society, that it is a form of online harassment involving the reporting of a fake crime to draw an emergency law enforcement response to target a victim. Well, Fanone said that was frightening. Well, yeah, because the idea of swatting is to get the victim killed by the cops. The swatting email is sending law enforcement officers into a situation where they are acting under the assumption there is an active shooter in progress, Fanone said. It is inherently dangerous. All it takes is one misinterpretation of someone's actions, my mother in this case, and it could go catastrophically wrong. She was reaching for the door handle. They thought she had a gun. See how that works? Fanone, who has been subject to threats since he became the face of the law enforcement response to the attack on the Capitol and called out lawmakers who played down the attack, said the majority of his interactions with the public are now negative. My mere presence puts people in an absolute rage, he said. What does that say about a segment of our society? What does it say about a segment of society that would threaten the lives of common citizens who sat on a jury and exacted judgment due to the evidence? What does that say? Back to the article. He attributed the swatting incident to anger over his criticism of Trump and what happened on January 6th. Well, yeah. He said that his mother described the police response as aggressive, and it appeared to her that the officers were wearing tactical gear. The Fairfax County Police Department said in a statement that it was alerted to a suspicious email by the Montgomery County Police Department. Officers responded to a block in Alexandria around 7:40 p.m. Authorities confirmed the call was to Fanone's mother's home and said they flagged the call as likely to be false before they responded. Their description of how the call was handled differed from Fanone's. Yeah, it always would, wouldn't it? Our patrol officers, wearing their everyday patrol uniforms, they wear tactical gear all the time, in other words, walked up to the home, knocked on the door, and kindly spoke to the resident. Open up the fucking door, bitch! That's kindly. Come on. How many people have watched any of these cop shows? Has anybody just walked up in a situation where there's a supposed active shooter? Please. He said Fanone's mother invited the officers inside. No arrest has been made. That's from the Fairfax County cops. The email, which was reviewed by the Post, identifies the author as Fanone and says, "I've killed my mom." The person then threatens to go shoot people at a school. Fanone said the officers asked his mother where his son was. Fanone said his mother showed the officers pictures of him and told them of his law enforcement background. Fanone said that on Wednesday, someone sent an unsolicited pizza to his mother's home. And earlier on Tuesday, Fanone had joined a campaign event for President Biden outside the New York courthouse where attorneys presented their closing arguments in the case against Trump over charges he falsified business records to cover up the hush money payment to adult film actress Stormy Daniels. Fanone, who said he voted for Trump in 2016 and said that the former president would govern as an authoritarian who answers to and serves only himself, he said supporters of Trump who attacked the Capitol on January 6 were, quote, fueled by Trump's lies and the lies of his surrogates, lies that the 2020 election was stolen. He then added, those same lies have been spewed by Donald Trump and his surrogates about what happened to me and so many other police officers on January 6th of 2021. That day, I was brutally assaulted. And I suppose one could say MAGA continues to assault Officer Fanone to this very day. Susan Montoya Bryan of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. A New Mexico judge yesterday, Thursday, granted Mark Zuckerberg's request to be dropped from a lawsuit that alleges his company has failed to protect young users on its social media platforms from sexual exploitation. The case is one of many filed by states, school districts, and parents against Meta and its platforms over concerns about child exploitation. Beyond courtrooms around the U.S., the issue has been a topic of congressional hearings as lawmakers and parents are growing increasingly concerned about the effects of social media on young people's lives. Really? After all these years? In New Mexico, Attorney General Raul Torres sued Meta and Zuckerberg late last year following an undercover online investigation. While granting Zuckerberg's request, Judge Brian Beedscheid dismissed Meta's motion seeking to dismiss the state's claims, marking what Torres described as a crucial step for the case to proceed against the social media giant. For decades, Meta platforms have prevented nearly every legal challenge against them from proceeding, Torres said in a statement. Today, the New Mexico Department of Justice brought that era to an end and is the first case by a state attorney general to raise child sexual exploitation claims, which can now be addressed. All social media platforms that harm their users should be on notice. Templeton of Oregon Public Broadcasting brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Whooping cough is spreading again in Oregon with 178 cases reported so far across 9 counties. It's a common bacterial illness that is mild in most people who have been vaccinated. Pregnant women and families with infants too young to have been fully vaccinated should take particular precautions, though. It can be serious and even fatal for infants younger than 6 months. To date, 16 cases have been reported in the state. Oregon reported record low cases of whooping cough during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic as masking and other measures reduced transmission of the bacteria that causes it, Bordetella pertussis. Lower disease transmission has led to waning immunity across the population. Lane County has reported the most cases to date, 64, followed by Multnomah with 41, Clackamas 33, Deschutes 15, Washington at 13, and Jefferson at 8 county and at 8. Most of the reported cases are in children. The actual number of cases is likely far higher, as many with whooping cough have milder symptoms and don't see a doctor. Antibiotics are effective against pertussis, but there's a catch. They only work when they're given early in the course of the illness, but the early symptoms of whooping cough, sneezing, runny nose, sore throat, make it hard to differentiate from allergies or common viruses. Get tested, get vaccinated, do it. All right, that brings us to our break, and we will go to our break. And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world and finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
Listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. This week, the script supervisor was imaginary. As one of the few who have successfully transitioned from sitcom star to hit director, John Krasinski is better off sticking with horror. His latest offering, If, is written and directed by him and is well-intentioned but can't compensate for a weak script. If, which stands for Imaginary Friend, tells the story of Bea, a young girl who is staying with her grandmother for the summer in New York City. Bea has already lost her mother to unknown circumstances, and her father, played by Krasinski, is in the hospital awaiting an operation for an undisclosed condition that we get the impression is more serious than he's letting on. Needless to say, the idea of potentially losing her only surviving parent is stressful for Bea. It's all she can think of until she meets the mysterious Calvin, Ryan Reynolds, who lives in her grandmother's apartment building. Calvin's unlikely job is trying to pair imaginary friends with new kids after their original companions have outgrown them. When asked to be his helper, Bea agrees, and hijinks and important life lessons ensue. While cleverly presented, it becomes predictable and a tad cloying. Adult viewers looking for any subtlety won't find it. But for young kids, the cloying may read as cute. Even the so-called plot twist is something that can be seen a mile away and mostly exacerbates the just-mentioned issues. Despite all that, there is some amazing talent on display, including Phoebe Waller-Bridge, who supplies the voice of the long-retired imaginary friend Blossom, and child actor Kaylee Fleming as the lead Bea. While Krasinski has finally succeeded making a movie his kids can watch, it's unlikely that you or any kid over 10 will appreciate If. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. Catch up with us at take2moviereview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
You're listening to the American Democracy Minute, keeping your government by-in for the people. The U.S. Federal Court's Fifth Circuit, known for its conservative and sometimes fringe rulings, recently reheard a case from Galveston County, Texas, over whether a community of African Americans and Latinx Americans qualifies for protections under the Voting Rights Act. The court's opinion could further weaken the VRA. Pettaway versus Galveston County, Texas, disputes redistricting of the county's commissioner districts, which civil rights and democracy groups argue took away the opportunity for African American and Latinx American voters to elect the candidate of their choice. In October 2023, a federal district judge agreed with the plaintiffs. Quote, "The circumstances and effect of the enacted plan were mean-spirited and egregious, given that there was absolutely no reason to make major changes to Precinct 3, unquote. New maps were ordered, but later stayed by the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, with the U.S. Supreme Court concurring. May 13th, the Fifth Circuit reheard the case, this time with the county arguing that the Voting Rights Act doesn't apply to mixed coalitions of voters, only to distinct groups of minority voters. Should the full Fifth Circuit panel agree, it could diminish the voting power of mixed minority communities around the U.S. A U.S. Supreme Court appeal is likely next year, meaning discriminatory maps will be used for the November election. We have links on the case and more at AmericanDemocracyMinute.org. I'm Brian Beal.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1921. That was the day one of the worst race riots in American history began in Tulsa, Oklahoma. In a frenzy of anti-black violence, a white mob destroyed virtually the entire black neighborhood of Greenwood. Over the course of the next 2 days, as many as 300 mostly black residents were killed. Black Wall Street had been burned to the ground, leaving 10,000 homeless. The day before, Dick Rowland, a young black man, tripped as he boarded an elevator at his job. He fell against the young white woman elevator operator. When she shrieked, nearby department store employees assumed she had been assaulted. Rowland was arrested, and newspapers fanned the flames of race violence and vigilantism. And on this day, white racist mobs surrounded the Tulsa County Courthouse where Rowland was being held and demanded he be turned over to them. Returning black veterans had become increasingly assertive about their rights as citizens. They marched to the courthouse armed in an attempt to prevent Rowland's lynching. When the vets refused to disarm in the face of the demands by the white mob, gunfire ensued, touching off 16 hours of fighting that literally decimated the community black workers and professionals had built up over the course of decades. The National Guard was called out, mainly to disarm and round up black residents of Greenwood. Witnesses reported that Greenwood was bombed from the air by police and by Sinclair Oil Company planes. The history of the riot was buried for more than half a century. It would take until 1997 for the Oklahoma State Legislature to set up a commission to uncover the bloody details, which produced a 200-plus page report and recommended millions in reparations. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 58 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting highs in the upper 80s, low 90s. Sunshine with a few clouds throughout the day, winds out of the north-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. A few clouds overnight with lows in the mid-50s, winds out of the west-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Then partly cloudy tomorrow with highs in the low 80s, winds out of the west-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. And it looks like we may get a quarter inch of rain on Sunday and maybe that much again on Monday. So that would actually be nice. I'm looking forward to it. Let's hope it happens. Grass pollen is very high, and that may be what is bothering our little Precious. She's been having a little wheeze and cough, and I'm hoping it's not something untoward, but if it's an allergy, it makes sense. And the air quality index for the region, though, is in the good range at 19 parts per million. The daytime UV index is very high, ticked down to level 8, but do take care. That's still a high number, obviously. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 30.13 inches. Visibility is up to 10 miles, and relative humidity is at 67%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world, and that is the Weather Underground. London is 58 degrees and cloudy. Paris is 58 and cloudy. Rome is 75 degrees and fair, and they continue to have a thunderstorm advisory. Kabul is 66 and clear. Hong Kong is 76 and cloudy. Tokyo is 66 and cloudy. Melbourne, Victoria, Australia is 51 degrees and clear. San Francisco, California is 60 and sunny. Chicago, Illinois is 72 degrees and fair. And New York is 74 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Jessica Donati at the World Desk of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. Billions of dollars in gold is smuggled out of Africa each year, and most of it ends up in the United Arab Emirates, where it is refined and sold to customers around the world, according to a report published yesterday, Thursday. Over $30 billion worth of gold, or more than 435 metric tons, was smuggled out of the continent in 2022 alone. The main destinations for African gold were the United Arab Emirates, Turkey, and Switzerland. The authors of the report said their goal was to make the trade in African gold more transparent and put pressure on industry players to do more to make gold supplies traceable and supply chains more responsible. The report found that between 32% and 41% of gold produced in Africa was not declared. In 2022, Ghana was the largest gold producer in Africa, followed by Mali and South Africa, the report said. The UAE was by far the main destination for smuggled gold, the report said, with some 405 metric tons of undeclared output from Africa ending up there. During a 10-year period between 2012 and 22, that amount summed up to 2,569 metric tons of gold, worth around $115 billion. At the World Desk of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Sweden's domestic security agency yesterday, Thursday, accused Iran of using established criminal networks in Sweden as a proxy to target Israeli or Jewish interests in the Scandinavian country. The accusations were raised at a news conference by Daniel Stenling, the head of the SAPO agency's counter-espionage unit, that's the SAPO, following a series of events earlier this year. In late January, as reported here at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, by the way, the Israeli embassy in Stockholm was sealed off after what was then described as a dangerous object was found on the grounds of the diplomatic mission in an eastern Stockholm neighborhood. Swedish media said the object was a hand grenade. The embassy was not evacuated, and the object was eventually destroyed. No arrests were made, and authorities did not say what was found. Then, on May 17th, gunshots were heard near the Israeli embassy in Stockholm, and the area was cordoned off. No one was arrested. Stenling said, without offering specifics or evidence to back up his assertion, that the agency can establish that criminal networks in Sweden are used as proxy by Iran. It is very much about planning and attempts to carry out attacks against Israeli and Jewish interests, goals, and activities in Sweden, he said, and added that the agency sees connections between criminal individuals in the criminal networks and individuals who are connected to the Iranian security services. Well, With that news, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day and the week, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here on Monday for River City Hash Mondays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day, all night, and all weekend for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here on Monday, right here, in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte coère. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. De novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.